Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. Moral conditioning evolves into spectrums of awareness. And so I don't have enough space to write it, but I wanted to speak about a concept I call freed will. So we have the concept of free will, which is pretty much the source of our animate existence and the source of our individuality. Ultimately, we think that who we are is a thought, but I feel it is a dynamic decision of awareness and self. And so the reason I've written it, moral conditioning evolves into spectrums of awareness, because I noticed it. I noticed something recently, and I noticed it in my own childhood, but I saw it in a video. And it was this kind of funny meme-like video on YouTube where this parent, her young daughter, takes out a toy, and the daughter says, "What the fuck?" And the parent gets shocked and immediately puts her hand on her daughter's mouth and says, "That's a bad word. You shouldn't use it." And I remembered suddenly how many times in my life my conditioning was not extracted out of my own concern for it. It was told to me. So when I say conditioning, that means not only your parents spoon fed you, your guardian spoon fed you, but the world and society and culture and everything you have ever seen has spoon fed meaning to you. The mind is so advanced that once you get sensitive to objectivity, the same way caveman used objects to kind of develop fire, similar to spark fire. Similarly, you can use subjectivity. Einstein has been known to say that genius is kind of like when you connect two worlds that have could not be connected before. You know, more notably for him, for example, space and time, becoming space time. Uh, Considerations of gravitational curvature. The science is really fascinating, to be honest. But it is not the only thing that our civilization needs. So this moral conditioning is very crucial because people's morality, if you're unconscious, if you feel you can't make the decision for yourself, you will most likely let others make the decision for you. Many moments in my life, I wasn't the soul of the moment, as I could say. Like I hadn't realized that I can be the soul of the moment. What I mean by that is that I felt every room that I entered, every moment I entered in my youth, it had to meet a certain criteria of my inner realm or I wouldn't engage. It's really fascinating how much human psychology revolves through stories. This moral conditioning that I say evolves into spectrums of awareness, I was just looking for in that video I told you where the mother kind of like tells her daughter that that's a bad word, don't use it. And I thought about how many people are told not to do things that they never wonder about, like it's like certain things that you take by the word. That means when words replace worlds for you, you can get the reality can become an illusion. That means if there's a room and you can open the room and see it for yourself what's in the room, but you're outside the room and somebody comes from outside that room and says, "Hey man, there's a giant blue elephant in that room." And so you have not gone into that room. Your experience is not extended towards understanding and grasping what's in that room, yet you can believe. You can believe there's a blue elephant in that room. You can believe there's any color elephant. You can believe any kind of animal. And so what I'm trying to suggest is that beliefs do not advance civilization. They are a part of its maintenance, but they do not advance it. The only thing that can advance the human civilization is understanding, which ultimately and very playfully I will say means look at what you're standing under, you know? Isn't it fascinating? We look at the ground, we see the surface of the earth, we look at the sky. Where's the surface of the sky? You see, it's endless. The edge of the sky has two edges. One edge man can't see, the other edge is behind his eyes. And that edge goes into the skies of the inner realms. And the skies of the inner realms is the ability for a creature that is sophisticatedly advanced in objective acknowledgement and subjective. It's like once you're comfortable like driving a vehicle, then you'll automatically by nature have comfort navigating your thoughts. Because a lot of our imagination, a vast majority is dependent on a static reference prior, which means reality. That means, you know, that song, what's his name? What's his name? How have I forgotten this man's name? That song, Imagine, you know, all the people, like that song, you know? Uh, John Lennon, there we go. That song by John Lennon, Imagine. So that word would not make sense to us if there was nothing there before. And so some people, their past becomes a source of stress for them. But when your past becomes a source of honor for you, you'll be like, holy shit, you know how many breaths I've taken in this world? How many, how many laps I've ran around the sun? What I'm trying to say is that experience changes reality beyond its subjective linguistic structure, and that's the power of it. That's our really evolutionary ability. That means evolution is pretty much like the creature kind of getting going into one domain of experience, and then it's like next, you know, and then goes into another domain of experience, and then it's like next, and eventually we are recognizing in history what is happening is that the inner realms are being shined a light is being shined more on the inner realms, and the discrimination between them was very different. That means I found it very fascinating that the school of Athens, imagine me and you and everybody who's listening, we were at the school of Athens in ancient Greece or whatever, in Athens, you know. Uh, we would simply see that dialogue that has never been heard before to one's visualization capacity will seem like a virtual reality. I am kind of like that human being that is saying, hey guys, our identities are hovering in thin air behind our eyes. And really communication and speech and writing, these things have been seen as how can I say it? It's like reading, writing, and speaking have been seen as three different ways of expression. But ultimately, every moment of your life is inspired based on how the life is here. That means right now, when I try to answer any sort of question, before it's like when the question is asked, okay, you see the question. Now your mind automatically tries to attempt. I say that the mind has a subconscious instantaneous attempt, which becomes the reaction, and also can have a more patient conscious action as a response. What I'm saying is, we are told what is good and bad until we live the system and we realize good and bad is a decision of how the attitude, how the psychology maintains itself subjectively. That means if you feel the world is against you, it doesn't matter how many friends come to you to wake you up. You will feel that they are your enemies. You know, I have made the world my enemy sometimes. You know, and it has karmic consequence. It's bad karmic weather. Hatred on this plane of existence is bad karmic weather, because the moment you hate something outside of you, you're simultaneously hating the mind that is being everything to itself. That means a part of your intelligence feels you're in the world, but I'm telling you, the mind is also simultaneously experiencing itself as the world. This is why when you hurt someone, when you do something off, you are actually hurting the own constitution of your mind. You're leaving the own ethical roots of your intelligence. Now, when it comes to morality, ethics, I mean, of course, we cannot, we have to see the evolution of the technology of language in the human mind. And without morality, without a need to figure out what was right and what was wrong, there couldn't be maintenance. That means you cannot maintain a company, okay? If you have one employee who's not doing, just imagine you're a company owner, okay? Imagine you have a business and one day you march into this business, and you suddenly see that the system, the business is not profitable. And you go see, it's as if one gear in this machine is not moving. And for example, one employee hates his job. He hates his job so much. Because he hates his job, he hates himself. Because he hates himself, people hate you too. People who hate themselves, it's very easy to hate others, because it's a way of releasing the hate they have for themselves. And this happens in fighting, physical fighting. I don't think many people notice this, but what happens is different inner atmospheres arise. And when a long fight endures, then it has to do with the strength of the character of the warriors. So if two warriors are equally matched, in skill, the victory will be decided by the one whose character is less shaky, less shaken, you know? When language can't touch you, that's the moment when you can touch language and do anything you want with it. Mastery is not about just repetition, robotic repetition. Mastery is about making the art your own. And what that means is you, as a living conscious being, have an authority that, as your consciousness explores the unconscious through every day that you live, to reformat and realign the inner realms. That means somebody can come and tell me, for example, I see something about reality and it's inaccurate. Somebody can come and tell me that, and I'll be very grateful. But if somebody comes and tells me an inaccuracy in my subjective realms, in that sense, I'll be like, okay, man, you haven't gotten a sense that language is evocational behind our eyes. What I'm actually doing is evoking image. I'm pretty much kind of like, sometimes I feel like an editor when I talk. I'm editing the sequence of the words that kind of come out before I say them. Okay, guys, so we have a comment in the comments section. Wayne Austin, love the light, respect the darkness. Well said. That means you can't love what you can't see, and you should respect what you don't see. Well said. Life is very fascinating. This thing about moral conditioning is deep. It's kind of like suddenly realizing um, the strings of your past were puppeteered in accordance to your character. And so this is why we have to protect, like let me tell you, there's two ways that humanity can protect its children. When I say children, that means any young being to the system. Okay, some beings are like, in certain shamanic traditions, the old and the young would be put beside each other. What that means is the oldest person in that shamanic kind of Amazonian tribe was put beside the youngest, and some anthropologists were like, "Why are you guys doing this?" You know, and then they said because one has stepped out of the spiritual realm, as they would say it, you know. And one is about to enter the spiritual realm. And so it meant that they were at very hypersensitivities, hypersensitivity to existential reality, hypersensitivity to non-existential reality. That means just because something doesn't exist atomically doesn't mean there is nothing here. Just because atoms are hovering meaninglessly in the air doesn't mean that there is no intelligence here. The intelligence can be of an experiential density. That means, like some certain scholars in history, I'll tell you, that when you cannot become a philosopher until you're abandoned in the jungle of your own thoughts alone, and you got to survive in your inner realm. What that means is how your intelligence to this point in your life has articulated, given architecture to subjective meaning. That means forget spirituality, forget metaphysics. We're just looking at how language is being subtler meaning. And so a lot of moral conditioning will not be, I don't want to say, make it kind of like a general thing, but like moral conditioning, the greatest force that the mind has is to observe. That's what the mind is here for, really. Action and all that is also a faculty of this observance, because observance can be static or it can be dynamic. That means you can run and look at something while running, or you can be still and look at something. And what that means is one's own experience can change when the way existence is linguistically constituted. This is why we're fascinated to human beings, regardless of how fascinated a robot is. It is the unknown variables to our personalities that really draws each other in. That means every person I've been fascinated by, I remember, um, you know, I don't know what it was. I think it was a kind of my intuitive, I had a sort of preferenceless playfulness, and I feel I stumbled into a sort of inner clarity. That inner clarity did not exist. That's how I can identify it. There was a point in my life where I wasn't alive. I mean, I had a certain abundancy in regards to my family, where I was raised, who I was with, the kind of minds I was exposed to. It was kind of like a very, very blessed. But I am telling you, there was a time where I felt dead inside, because if the inner self does not change, you will feel it's missing out. So that symptom of feeling dead inside is actually not finding yourself participating in a greater game that is going on. So really what happens, I remember hearing the statistic that they said in Japan, 3 men per day die alone. And I was like, holy shit, why don't these people go out of their houses? And I realized, because culture becomes hierarchicalized, because of its hierarchy, people feel they're not permitted to enter rooms. If you watch the movie Parasite, which recently got an Oscar, you would totally recognize the psychology of different class distinctions. And really, it has to do with the nature of the person. I have seen people who on the outside seemed incredible. Not incredible, they seemed cool. But behind, I noticed, holy shit, this person is okay to they are okay to twist reality. So the person's wickedness had an authority behind their eyes to express in civilization. Anything you avoid, most likely you will hurt or it will hurt you. I've gone through various landscapes of my own morality. Ultimately, there was an emotional, experiential decision making. So, to judge what is right and wrong doesn't mean it has to be like an intellectual analysis only. It's not just like analyzing something. It's like, just because you understand how a car engine moves doesn't mean you're a good driver. You become a good driver when you understand why the idea of that action exists. You got to think about it this way. Tell me how, nobody, it's like you cannot, somebody told me this once, and it was very fascinating. They said that if you want to learn anything, you got to study the language for it. So if you right now want to become an astrophysicist, you got to be familiar with the concepts that have existed before. That's why how I was kind of drawn to philosophy. I wasn't as a kid like a person who cared what philosophers say. To me, philosophers were like just people who weren't doing that much physical stuff. There was a time in my life that if I saw myself now, I would ignore myself. If that version of me pre 2011, if it saw me now, it would get angry at me. So, guys, in the comment section, we have Ivan saying genius takes the complex and simplifies it so all can understand and finds infinite complexity in the mundane. Genius walks the line, the insane lament. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, for me, genius, true genius, is not objective per se. It is kind of like how Henry David Thoreau says, it's not what you're looking at that matters, it's what you see. That seeing is seeing through the eyes of the context of the moment. What that means is right now I have a cup in front of me and I think about the cup. Now realistically, what can change from every moment? What can change? Either the self or the world. Either the world changes quicker or the self changes quicker. If your sense of self changes quicker in the world, you will feel in control. If you change slower than the world, you will feel you're being dragged by forces unknown. Genius is strangely a sacrifice of everything the past has said to see what the new can be. Any person who is an explorer, you are a genius will come to you. If you are authentically care about the world, it will find you. There's this concept that the world, there is, like, think of it this way. Right now, every person, if we were Jungian, we would consider that is functioning through an archetype. That means even right now, me using the name alias Mr. Within, I'm going through an archetype. But the archetype I tend to entertain, and it was something that I realized by nature I was since childhood, was that of a designer. So a designer doesn't really get too emotional over anything. It just observes the design, looks at its motion and activity. So for me, it may sound sometimes chaotic. Sometimes I've wondered, because I've had viewpoints on reality where, how like you look at something and you can totally storify it, you can explain it through language. I've sometimes seen moments of life that were just pure geometrical movement. There was no me, there was no self, there was no world. It was just living geometry you know and in those moments like after that unique state of mind, I came into a sort of that unique sensitivity to a state of mind. I came into a position where I have trust me, I have not only just cried for what's in front of my eyes. Sometimes I have cried for myself, just not in a depressed pity kind, not in a per se self-loathing. It's sometimes some things that a person doesn't do, that regret has an emotional karmic need. That means you did something at some point, you didn't feel the emotion then, years later go by, suddenly out of nowhere, the emotion arises you know In those moments where I've wept for myself, let me tell you what happened. I wept for myself. I wept for myself. And then that self was like that moment in the Titanic where the jewel was thrown under the water. I have said goodbye to my past archetypes by just acknowledging them. Pretty much, guys, we've got it all the other way around. People have desires for static things in a dynamic system and they suffer. When you realize everything changes, when you realize one thing that has remained with you. When I look at myself from now and like, I don't know, like 20 years ago, I see what has remained with me is how my attention is here. Everything has changed. Even my body looks differently. I mean, I still acknowledge a certain linear path to myself when I function in society, but that there are moments where I have, in some sense, I have experienced as much as animate moments of my mind, inanimate moments too. Inanimate moments means the subjective realm is is has subsided, kind of like the ripples on the pond has settled. So sometimes you can have such a quiet mind that you don't need to be anything. There's no inspiration of language. Ultimately, I realized the problem with our civilization is emotional stability, because unless there's emotional stability, the rational actions will never be rational. And it's very hard to have emotional stability when there's the presence of the imagination. And what the imagination is here for is to kind of suggest what you see is not the only thing. That means whatever you have seen, your mind has, like an artist, taken it and as you have wielded your sensory perception, the animation of the attention arises. My attention is, I had a moment where I just sat down. I was on the porch, I remember, and I was just experiencing a unique kind of subjective experience. When you trust your subjective realms, that then it's like you trust your mind, so your mind trusts you, the world trusts you in accordance to the simplicity that you can maintain. And it's very easy in life when things get complex, navigate simply. When things get simple, feel free to navigate through complexity. And we are so culture driven. That means culture is a program where it's really that's giving authorization to the social creature. Do you know how many people I've seen where I remember seeing the person, and this kid had not understood the flaw of having many faces. Either the kid felt like an ancient Vedic deity that had a bunch of faces, or the kid was or that person was okay, has not understood the cost of lying. There's a cost of lying, internal cost. The cost of internal of lying is that your authenticity didn't live in the moment. It's as if a certain movement that came naturally to you was filtered out, and so now the function becomes unnatural. We are moving in an era where we have to pilot our attention. That's the whole point of evolution, by the way. That we got free will. What do we do with this free will? You know? What do we do? What do we do with the free will? Some people say you have no choice but to have free will. Some people say free will doesn't exist, you know? But when the free will is freed, that's when your mind breathes anew. And you'll kind of feel as if there are moments where I felt I can never know the extent of what is here, and there's been moments where I feel I am the extension of what is here, you know. That means some days you feel like the cosmos, some day some days, you're just walking in the cosmos. So something I have to share, guys, because I think this is crucial, about moral conditioning. If we say moral conditioning is a sort of spoon feeding of narrative at an early age, then the morality of the individual, until they feel they're individual, I feel is not their morality. That means until you are fully responsible, that means it's okay. That means a lot of systems of our intelligence are naturally kept. Like we don't think about our heart beating, we don't think about our lungs breathing. It's all very natural. We don't even think about healing ourselves, or the body heals itself, right? So a lot of things are unnatural. But now certain things are in conscious reception, mainly that which is in front of it. That means I don't have that much. I don't want to say I don't have, but like it's much easier for me to move my hands than like like that martial art master from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, where at the end he was moving the direction of his bloodstream the other way to reduce the poison. The poison's kind of extension. So what I'm saying is like underneath my skin, nature's doing the work. In front of my skin, I am doing the work. The I am is here, and the I am has been shunned by many mystical traditions. But I feel it shouldn't be shunned. You can't shun a technology. Imagine saying your phone is bad. It's like this phone is so bad. This phone is evil. You know. By the way, guys, welcome to the chat. I do acknowledge the chat section. Sometimes I just have to finish painting the picture I'm trying to say. Uh, Actually, guys, I'm looking at the chat now. Interesting. I was introduced to my heart soul recently and wept with tears of joy. Wow. Hmm. Yeah, I'm just noticing it doesn't matter. Not that it doesn't matter, but it's like we are constantly putting the intelligence of this universal sector that could potentially be beyond the limits of our perception into just boxes of language, and we're turning viewpoints on the world into, how can I tell you, the mind is, if you can have a new thought and you have access to old thoughts, that means there's a choice. There is a choice how the eyes open up to the world. And I think that's the most crucial thing. Sometimes I've even thought, could the karma of the day be based on how I opened my eyes, that kind of millisecond where the eyes opened and whatever emotion was there? And usually emotions, they color the context of the world, you know? Really, I'm saying that when I say, it's not that you unlearn it, you can't unlearn, like you can't get rid of something that your mind was exposed to. For example, when you see an image, you can forget it after many years, but because the content of it was experienced, I have sometimes a sort of no judgment on my own experiences, because I know that in this moment, even if I remember that experience, it's being painted by the emotions of now. The world we live in and the world that lives in us. We feel free, yet as long as there's evolution, how can we be? There's always something to strive for. There is always a day that will come that will change the meaning of life for you. And the cool thing is, the human being can have multidimensional values. That means an object could have a value by just being an object. An object can have a value by having a symbolic metaphor. Many things in the world are based on how we hold them. And any object you hold, you can see that you can hold it in many different ways. So it's like suddenly realizing every belief, every vision, every experience you have had, you can not only hold it in a new way, but you can throw that subject in there and in some sense pick it up in any way you like, grab it in any way you like. Language is becomes a freedom to that being who acknowledges it. Even though I do speak technically about certain things, I don't acknowledge this cosmos to be lifeless. It has a life that is unknown to me. And that's the fascination of it. And it's not about trying to define that life or to capture it in words. The greatest disservice to children is not allowing their own eyes to look at things first. And this is why the best thing any parent in the world can do is ask questions from your children. ask questions to see how their mind would attempt the answer. A lot of what people think is thinking is self-explanation, non-vocalized. The glory of humanity is a realization beyond the limits of our perception. That means if we have a limit, like if any average human being can understand that, like why don't you see Wi-Fi waves? So when we acknowledge that in the color spectrum there's a certain range that we have access to, and that, for example, what is it? Snakes see in infrared, dogs see in black and white. Like there's different ways that different creatures are not just seeing the colors of the world, they are seeing the values of the world. So what that means is behind our eyes, we have to acknowledge a multidimensional civilization. In front of our eyes, we have to acknowledge a singular civilization. And so I see this as a kind of yin yang between the one dimension and the two dimension. And of course, I have my own way of explaining dimensions, and I've found a very nice way to sum it up, that all of this plane of existence can be handled by the acknowledgement of these four dimensions: zero, one, two, infinity. These four symbols, if you can experientially comprehend these, then all of the subjective realms become accessible very easily. You can then do whatever you want in subjectivity, because when you acknowledge the zero dimension, that means you won't freak out if something that was there goes away. When you acknowledge the singular dimension, you won't freak out if one thing is going to be the definer of that moment. In various altered states, it's not just the objective psychology shifts, the objective perception shifts, but the internal perception can shift as well. And it's kind of thinking that if our psychology has to do with our energy levels, and for example, a tired person is more agreeable, then we can kind of even say our morality has to do with our energy. That means if people worked, I feel civilization would have a totally different experience. We would have a totally different experience of our civilization if our energy didn't run out. And if our energy didn't run out, we wouldn't need to sleep. And if we didn't need to sleep, we would not need to have a dualistic mindset. So immortality, if you pay attention, it's usually for beings who can't confront the singular dimension, so they have to be it. Certain things that you can't, you've stayed away from. You subconsciously felt that thing won, and you're acting like it. You know, the mind is as the ancients would call it, a trickster. But I would consider it as a technology that your way of use suggests. One can even consider a knife, a sword, a knife to be a technology. Okay, and now this knife can be used to, for example, cut fruit for a healthy diet, or it can be used to bring corruption. So what you see, corruption and violence. So what you notice is that how you are using the acknowledgement of how the thought is there. And when you find yourself free from thoughts, I find that's when you can actually acknowledge thoughts, and the world will thank you for it. Sometimes I think people don't want us to listen to them. They want they want to just be heard. Most how can I say it? Like, the emotional stability has to do with how healthy the externalization of the inner realms have been. For example, if you were a child that in your childhood you wanted to do something, say something, and you were always stopped, as if silence, non-stop silence, you will be a child who would feel as if, why should I even hold language in my hand? It's like, who nobody wants to listen. And for example, that psychology may influence your character later on. So anything, it becomes about decision making, because whatever duality you engage, you will see both sides of it. You do anything long enough, you will see the chaotic face and the ordered face of that action. And when the chaotic self and the ordered self bow down to who is there, you realize there is something more important than every idea that the individual has ever had: how the collective is present. And it is not an intellectual solution. It has to do with a empathy. Literally, you have to see other human beings as, rather than known bodies to you where you can judge, as unknown potentials of mind. So it's kind of like we're trying to make a genius civilization, and so the individuals have to attempt their own genius. And so it's you got to think of it as if there's something strange, guys. I don't know what it is, but there it was an advantage, I think, in the religious mindset that they felt they were being watched by truth. Because when you feel you're being watched, you feel you're performing. Do you know that means there is a sense of it's like reality is how would I say it? Like my grandmother told a story and about her grandfather, and her grandfather when he was a kid he was traveling between two countries. Sorry, not two countries. He was going from one town to another on a horse, and it was snowing, and the grandfather is how would I tell the story? Pretty much the story was I'll just say it like this. There was a young kid. This young kid, his father writes him a letter. He has to travel on horse to go to the next town and give the letter to his other relatives so that they give him a job in that town. And so as this kid's going on the horse, it's snowing and it's dark night. And so back in the day, like now we don't, people are not comfortable having their children on the street, but back in the day, children had to ride horses to different towns, alone for 2 days or something, you know. And so he goes. The story, how the story unfolds, is that he finds himself suddenly kind of taking a break in a forest, and he sees a wolf, an actual wolf, in front of him. He sees a wolf kind of moving closer to him, and he's just this religious kid with a kind of Muslim background, and all that he does, he just shouts God's name. That means just imagine you have no sciences, nothing. It is a different time. All you have is an image that there is something out there watching that can control things. And so this kid in that moment where he sees the wolf, he just shouts like the name of God loud. He just starts shouting. Imagine being there's moments where death corners a person, you know? And when that moment comes, that it's not just an adrenaline rush, but it is the last stance of the psychology. And so in that moment, he just shouted his truth. And he says the wolf froze. The wolf froze on the spot, not moving a single thing. And he slowly got on his horse and got out of there. You know? And I was thinking, like, there's many explanations why why the wolf could have kind of just freaked out because the voice was so loud that it like shocked it, or it could also be because maybe there was some other thing, you know. Maybe this universe um, takes care of its employees, you know. So the subjective landscape was the sort of strange support system for in an existential situation where the individual is just alone. So I can see that the more a civilization becomes emotionally stable, the more fragmented its languages become. If you treat um, human civilization as a giant play, theatrical play, it's as if the actors enter the stage, and because they don't know who they are, they look at what others are and they come into agreement with the other. Sometimes you got to know what others are before you can actually know yourself. You need it's like the concept of the self is a separation from all phenomenology into an individual controllable phenomenology. Kind of a progression from nothing, something, from something, multiple things, unfathomable things. A progression of a conceivable limitation into the inconceivable and the limitless. So this would be the ultimate archetype. So an infinite archetype, I'm going to call it. An archetype where the being's ego feels they are everything. You know? When you look at evolution for a caterpillar, it's the strangest thing. It's like the caterpillar experiences itself as two different beings before this one creature dies. How fascinating is it? Like, of course, I understand human evolution by biologists is being considered to be a slow progression, a slow adaptation, you know. But when you look at the insect kingdom, what do you see? You see the caterpillar being like, God, why do I have so many legs? It makes no sense. I'm so small. It's like if I was horse size, now that'd be something, you know. But the caterpillar is this tiny insect with many legs. And in its lifetime, it evolves. It goes through a metamorphosis where all the cells of the caterpillar die, and then the cells of the butterfly emerge. And then it's like, whoa, I have wings now. So I was looking at this and I'm like, could the mind of the human being have an evolutionary path like the caterpillar, you know? But it's like as if we start off as a body thinking that it's a mind, and then we metamorphosize into a mind being projecting a body. We start off as a particle in a field, then we go through a metamorphosis and become the field that is moving the particle. And so I was thinking, what if, in regards to the ideology, the individuality of the consciousness, of the individual consciousness, it's like I am not the same being as I was yesterday. I can't be. I have seen new things of this day. So in some sense, really, we can never be words. We cannot be thoughts. Yet, words can be bridges to worlds. You can use the technology to cut fruit, you know? All right, guys, my attention is coming back to the chat section. It was on full screen. I think, guys, interesting point. Yeah, the voice is definitely rhetoric was an art form, and my greatest kind of understanding of it is that without sincerity, there is nothing to hold the art. Without a sort of absence, it's like if there's still furniture in the room, you can't bring in new furniture. You take out the furniture and then you look at the design of the empty room, and then comes new projections of what can be valid or invalid. So I see in the chat section, guys, I'll tell you a story about fish. This is like, I think, one of the best stories that will ever exist about fish. So there's a bunch of young fish. They want to understand what God is, but God to them is the ocean. And so they go to this older fish this wiser sage of a fish. And they tell this older fish, what is God? What is truth? Da 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 da. And the older fish is quiet. And then they keep asking. And these are educated younger fish. They know everything about the ocean, they believe, you know. And so they come and they say, they're like, and then the older fish, after some point, is like, okay. The older fish says, what God is, what the ocean is it is everywhere in everything, and its currents, the divine will move us. And then all these educated fish, they're like, let's not even say educated, these fish all look at this guy, these younger fish, and they're like, that this sage, um, this fish sage, and they say, no, man, no. Because we are fish, we're shaped fish, God has to be a bigger fish. And so they see a shark and they start following it only to get devoured by the divine agencies, your ignorance of your own image of the divine agency. So the thing is, the ocean is kind of like this oneness that everybody's trying to figure out. And you are an individual in the collective. So what that means is the same way that fish is being moved by the currents of the sea, of the ocean, similarly, every person's intelligence is being moved. It's being moved. That means there are call it the invisible chess master's hand. I don't know. Like there something does move intelligence, and it's either, and I've noticed it. I mean, kind of, I've seen insects and animals do strange things sometimes, and I've wondered, could it be because of my own electromagnetic field, that when I'm around this being and this being finds itself in this space of a higher being rather than us, it's like if there is a higher dimensional being, if our eyes were to land upon it, we would not be in this dimension. So what that means is, all the pet owners in the world wonder how your pet is comprehending you. Wonder about the morality of your pet. Does your pet have morality? When you see, for example, a lion protecting its baby cub, uh, was there a religious story in the head of that lion? Was there a narrative? Were there conditions? Were there things? Or was it life, protecting life? That's it. That which you are, you're subconsciously, you wanted to endure. So any moment you find something in common with you, it's like how many mentors in history have kind of looked at the mentee and seen their younger self, and they're like, all right, I'll help this kid. That empathy is very crucial. So it's kind of strange. Language does limit us from direct experience, but at the same time, we require it to have a commonality to be able to direct the experience into the potentials of a greater civilization. Really, I mean, if we're all alive once physically in this form, that means the atoms are. It's like, enjoy your body. This is it. This is what you're being here in this planet existence. So I'm saying that there will come a time where, how can I say it? It's like your body is kind to your mind, and when your body is about to transition, your mind becomes kind to your body. So what that means is the individualism. Um, what can I say? All the questions of the drop are answered in the ocean. It's like when the drop falls into the ocean, it's like there's no longer anyone asking a question. What really happens, I think, in the mystical vision is the value you have for yourself before you had a value for the world nullifies. So ultimately, you're left in the value of the world. So that's when compassion exudes, but that's not the ultimate state. As that compassion exudes, you still feel conditionally dependent. So what that means is you have to respect the conditions of everything you see in front of your biological eyes. But all that content that is accessible behind your eyes, how imagination is your own private room, um, that is something where so I mean, I don't know, guys, if in the chat section you guys want me to get into the kind of hidden voice of nature and the language of nature, that's going to move the direction of the talk differently. So if I don't know if people are interested, you can write in the comment section, and um, I can steer the talk that way. Um, but ultimately, here I'll do something. I'll put a conclusion to what the title. I gotta explain the title again, and then I'll go into the hidden language of nature. What I'll do is, I think I'll end the talk, this talk. I'll conclude this talk, and then I'll give a new talk about the hidden language of nature right after. But remind me, guys. So, okay. No, because it is a fascinating topic. Ultimately, all of these go to the depersonalization of experience beyond language. So ultimately, we're kind of like I at least feel the people who are drawn to this talk. I hope that you have an interest in your own observation of phenomena and the extent of it. Like there's many. Um, the mind must feel. There is a fear of stillness and silence. I feel until that fear of stillness and silence is confronted, and you just kind of will appear as an abidance. It has nothing to do with your thoughts or how your objectivity is. It's how the moment is before you were some phenomena in it. So that's the hidden language. Ultimately, that hidden language is like a field. It's a field. So that it's like in that field, time is not linear. Because time is not linear, everything is accessible momentary based. So what that means is we don't have all the sophisticated categories of our intellectual advances in our current civilization. Some things I say they're beyond the language threshold. And if I don't say that, people are going to. It's like it's they're gonna forget it. You have to. The language threshold is when you as a being have an experience that cannot be contained or surpasses any sort of dualism. So emptiness, you've gone beyond the language threshold. If you feel you are emptiness, like you know, if you feel you are everything, that ultimate oneness, again beyond the language threshold. The image is so the context that it's as if union oneness is when the concept and the context no longer exist separately. And this was to the Sufi dervishes 700 years ago a sort of enlightenment, that they called it was a sort of death before they died. It was an inner death. It was the inner death of an illusion. The death of how it's not like it's an illusion. It's just that you realize how you opened the door, and so it was your hand that opened the door. Then there comes a contentment, because ultimately existence is a rough place. Okay, we are creatures that require to maintain ourselves to continue. And the more advanced civilization becomes, and the more harder it becomes for the human being to maintain themselves in society, the more they're going to want to replace their whole suffering technologically. So imagine people begin living in such unhealthy lifestyles that it's easier for them to be a conscious machine than to be a biological human being. And that's one thing that it was an alarm. It was an alarm of history I saw. It was a pattern in history that it's not that we should allow it to repeat, but it's just that I think it's inevitable that there will come a time that technology evolves so much that many people can plug themselves into the same moment and become one being ultimately. So I feel that before that, we should experience it naturally, and that means there must be in all the laws of mankind a need to constantly protect the human nature, the human design. That means it's like even if you don't know many people's like there's 8 billion of us on this rock. So if you don't know 8 billion different kinds of people and personalities, like who they are, you at least know that they are it's like we're on the same playing field. The battlefield is our unity. So that's the thing. I'm kind of saying we should not avoid chaos. We should look at how it's happening, and then that there's a chance for the order. Because I'm telling you, it's if the world, as much as there can be a digital world chaos, there can be a digital world order. There can be many ways that human beings are being decided to move forward in civilization, but we cannot ignore the freedom we have. And it's not something that it's like even though I say kind of mysticism is like an existential Rubik's cube, but it's not something that can have one subjective answer to an objective moment and that's it, everything's fulfilled. It's about list some I remember somebody once telling me, um, the person was um, what do you call him, personal like trainer for bodybuilders, right? And he told me his name was Hamid, and he told me that I asked him, okay, so what's the best way to maintain? And he's like, listen to your body. You know, that was his suggestion to the maintenance of health. That means you become alert all the time in every moment what is changing about your physical constitution. So now I'm kind of saying, all right, what he said is so goddamn universal that you listen to the moment and the unknown unfolds rather than the known preconceiving how the unknown should unfold, and life gets exciting and you live it, and that's it. That's it. You keep piloting. You pilot your plane of existence and you experience its various elevations. When I say you pilot, that means you got to be concerned of the passengers. Because I inevitably see civilization, like think of it, there's been an evolution of what we have identified with. We identified with animals in the jungles, now we're identifying with people in the cities, and then what's next? And what is next is we will identify as the awareness of the self. And the awareness of the self is non dual. So that means for the first time, we have to find a way where our personalities can confront the void and infinity without breaking. And so we need a lot of language engineers. I kind of, this is how I want to playfully, like I've said it once before, playfully like this, that really what the task of all living beings in 2020 is it's as if we have to create, it's like the movie 2012, it's the end of the world, and we have to create, find all the wielders and engineers from all around the world, and language engineers, I mean, you know? And so we have to build a new narrative that is going to become like a bunker for the future generations if they lose hope in their individual lives. Right now, the system is not exciting. Most people feel stuck rather than it's like a traffic jam in regards to in regards to the efficient lives of individuals. And it's very complex because for me, of course, every person's different. I'm just sharing my view, but nationalism was so crucial to the evolution of language, but it is not the most efficient way that creatures on a rock can organize themselves. Because if you think about it, there is different resources on the rock. We give so many freedoms, but one freedom we have not given the human being is freedom to the whole world. Imagine suddenly the children woke up, they washed their face, ran to the news, they began to see that the United Nations had declared that a new law had come into place, a new universal law that every human being is allowed to experience the world that they are in once. Suddenly, nations cannot have borders. Now, I'm just being playful here, guys. Just entertain what I'm saying. But nations cannot have borders. And so, what would that mean? That would mean all the resources everywhere is for everyone. Now, this doesn't mean this is the best route. I'm just entertaining. You see, what happens is when you look at anything about the future, parallel realities automatically emerge, especially as you rewind back in time. The hidden language of nature is experientially oriented, and it's about how the attention is more than what the content of the moment is. So imagine, for example, Einstein, an old lady in like near the train comes up to him. Imagine, I'm saying, and says, "You're an idiot." Doesn't even know who Einstein is, and says, "You're an idiot. Look at your hair. What an idiot. Why is your hair like this?" And something like that. And Einstein remains quiet. And Einstein, imagine, remains quiet because he sees that she is not willing to see more. And then somebody comes up to that lady. It's like, "Yo, lady, that's Einstein. Leave him alone. He's done enough. He's gone through enough mental suffering." Moral conditioning. The child is told what's good and bad. This evolves eventually through the originality of the child, realizing when the child becomes more and more dependent on the conditions that it puts in the world rather than the world puts into its mind. That kind of individualism that is defined by the world, uh, I don't know, we can say the self is an attempt to detach from the world. And the mind becoming the world is an attempt to detach from the self. So I feel these spectrums of awareness come into place when you actually realize what you are not. So that's what I think it is. The moral conditioning is artificial. It eventually evolves as the creature becomes more acquainted and grounded in the physical plane and begins to realize that the authority of reality's animation can arise from one's own attention. That means if I'm talking to someone, in that moment, I'm a self. But if I'm alone sitting on a rock in the middle of a river, in that moment, I'm not a self. It's as if I realize the simplicity of how my awareness is already being the whole moment. That's ultimately the proper meditation. You're not focused about the content. You can't really control. Sadhguru says this very clearly. The content of your mind is not your choice. Somebody comes and says apple. Can you stop yourself from visualizing an apple or whatever? Or you know, I'm saying that it's like a lot of things happen unconditionally. You can't really do anything about it. But some things happen conditionally, and sometimes those things that happen conditionally, we are still treating unconditional because in our childhood we were dependent on a system that we never grew out of. So the evolution of the behavior has to do with a self-discovery of your own authenticity, whatever that would mean to you. For me, it meant listening to my moment, listening to how my moment was moving. That means I would sit somewhere, and sometimes it's like, of course, I've practiced it, but sometimes I've been known to laugh at odd times, you know. And it's because what something I see, I don't see only one implication of it. And as my mind is going through the various implications, one implication probability of it is silly, for example, you know? And I don't know, to be honest, it's very hard to really judge a personality that's changing all the time. The personhood is really aligned to the next experience, right? That means if tomorrow I decide to become a professional skydiver, like that will totally change everything if I choose to be. And so that choice doesn't mean it's going to be that. I'm just saying that it's the way the attention wield your attention. Our ancestors held swords in battlefields. We are now holding minds in complex landscapes. I'm not joking when I say the secrets of the universe are in your attention. Just study how awareness is being self and how the self is aware, and that's it. Because what it is it's not something the person lacks and needs to get. It's something they have which they can't see. So it's as if you are already great, you just can't see it. Your head's turned to your own greatness, turned away from your own greatness. And what is that greatness? The greatness of the individual realm is ultimately the collective. That means for how many years? Imagine everyone was a billionaire. For how many years would we just enjoy? Like imagine eons passing by where people just selfishly lived and everybody had enough resources. Imagine there was no scarcity of resources, so we have the kind of abomination of an economical system. Imagine everybody had everything they wanted. For how long would history go on with people not caring about what was there? You'll see it's a different sort of joy when you see your world and then you actually acknowledge it. That's why they call it self realization. It's already there, you know? This is why, like, those people who go and ask, let's like, it's like, hey man, can I get enlightened, please? It's like the guru would be like, no. And then the person would get sad, and the guy would be like, holy shit, this person still thinks he's a thought. He's getting sad over language, you know? It's like, long way to go, buddy. I don't know. Eventually, I think life is, it reveals its hidden style. And it has to do with the character of the person. If you are afraid of the unknown, you will define yourself by what is known. I feel it's very rare. I feel it's like not every person is comfortable with how something doesn't have to make sense. We are so obsessed with a sort of a self being in a certain way that everything has to suddenly have an implication. And really, it takes energy, guys. It takes energy to see the objective phenomena, but also have all the subjective considerations of it. But that's the cool thing about it, right? The cool thing is that the person can close his eyes, go through various visual landscapes, fly through various visual landscapes, sub-visual, let's say, subjective, and they can stand up and feel a bit more exhausted than before, which means um, the body is moving the imagination as much as the imagination is moving the body. So either the body is moving itself through the mind is a sort of coping mechanism for a biological body that is purely an attributeless. It's like either we're people right now or we're all nature. So so anyways, guys, if there's if anybody has any questions on what I just said this past hour and 15 minutes, it's like, please share, or else I feel I need to go um, relax a bit in my Pure Lance, you know. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. Recently, I've there's many new projects I've decided to kind of go all out on. Um, so I'll probably create an episode where I'll just explain that. But anyways, thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and namaste.